Welcome to Business Spotlight on Money Radio WPSE. Business Spotlight is heard weekly at this time on 1450 AM and 107.1 FM. Today, Dr. Ralph Ford, Chancellor at Penn State Behrend, sits down with Joe Snyder, President at Process and Data Automation.
Welcome to Behrend Talks. My guest today is Joe Snyder, the President of Process and Data Automation, which is part of the Crones Group and a company we have right here in Knowledge Park. Joe is also a graduate of Penn State Behrend. Welcome to the show, Joe.
Welcome. Thank you, Dr. Ford, and thank you for having me here today.
Well, we really appreciate it. We're going to have a great conversation. You're one of those quiet companies here in town, I say that, and startup companies that's really done a tremendous amount. So we're very proud of what you've done, and we want to get into that today. So why don't you tell us a bit? Let's just start out. Who is who's Process and Data Automation? What do you do?
We like to tell people that we're an automation company that doesn't actually make anything. We help clients that need to make things via physical automation, and we augment that physical automation with tightly integrated manufacturing and business systems. So if somebody needs to make an existing process better, if somebody needs to implement a new process, or if the process is fine, but they just need better connectivity to the information that they either push to a factory floor via manufacturing processes or via packaging processes, or collect good information back from that equipment or those processes, that's the type of thing that we do.
Okay. But you say you don't make anything, but yet you do ultimately make something. You produce something, even if it's
Absolutely.
lines of code or integration. So physically you create things.
Correct. It's difficult. Oftentimes if somebody says, what do you make? And you could put an iPhone down on a table and say, these are what we make. People understand that. There's just rarely a real physical embodiment to what we're doing. It's certainly heavily on the intellectual side.
Yeah, certainly what you're doing is you're helping to improve processes, automation, robotics, data analytics, I assume, is part of it. So, that's a big buzzword right now, but that's one of the problems out there, that there's this tremendous amount of data that's created in, almost any realm, but certainly from a manufacturing floor. How much of that is driving what you're doing?
Interestingly, a large portion of it, and even that we actually don't get into analytics firsthand ourselves, but analytics of bad information is bad analytics.
Right.
And so
garbage in, garbage out.
Exactly,
right?
Exactly. And so if a client wants to improve a process, we begin right at the floor level, right at the equipment level, right at the sensor level, and we help them to connect that information, validate that information. Now that can be taken somewhere, put into a big data lake, and a lot of pulling of historical information and predictability can come out of that.
Okay. So what sort of industry? So you say you help in manufacturing, I know you work with a lot of food companies and beverage, but it's a lot more than that.
Well, the biggest sectors, it's almost like a two-part business, if you will. The further away we get from the physical location here in Erie, Pennsylvania, the more it becomes extremely heavily concentrated in food manufacturing. Since our acquisition by the Crones Group coming up on 3 years ago, that gets narrowed even more into liquid food. We do tend to do pet food as well, greater than, we'll say, 75 miles around the Erie area. Within that sphere, the physical sphere of about 75 miles, there's very little that we don't get involved with. If you name it, if it's manufactured around here and you've seen it, either being transported on a truck or on a logo on somebody's shirt, and you can think of that product that's being made, odds are we've done something for that customer here in the region.
So how do they find you? You don't even have to advertise, is my guess. People know your reputation. How do people find you?
Well, that's changed through the years for sure. Certainly word of mouth and reputation gets you places after you've been around. We do actually employ a professional sales force that does go out and meet with clients, but it's a lot different than make 1,000 phone calls this week, try to get 100 worthwhile conversations, 10 meetings, and 2 sales. It's not like that. It is truly the sale of professional services. So we meet with executives at the executive level, leaders in manufacturing, people as they talk about retrofitting facilities, as they talk about retrofitting lines, as they talk about buying or building new facilities. We're involved in those discussions often early on. Our web has spread quite a bit, and I'm sure we'll delve into this deeper later on with the alumni of PDA. We have people who've worked for PDA who maybe were full-time employees for a while or for a long period that for family reasons or other reasons have had to move out of the area. We have great customers that we work with in that regard. We also have now, as we've had dozens and dozens of interns through the years, there are many of them out in industry all around the country that we work with as well. So that's provided a nice connectivity for us too.
I imagine with your business, a lot of it's long-term relationship building. First of all, it's not a widget that you sell. You're selling your services, your know-how, the ability to work in a lot of domains. So convincing a customer is you're building a long-term relationship with them.
Absolutely. And we rarely, I shouldn't say you'll never, we rarely start anything new with brand new clients that are brand new to us and every partner on the job that are $1 million projects. Typically, those are clients that you've worked with in another facility or perhaps the key players within an organization as they've maybe been somewhere else. But it is all about relationships because what we do does come with high potential liability. And it's the type of thing you turn to people you know when they decide to undertake a project that we would get involved with. There's a pretty short list usually coming out of the gate. And so we like to be one of those players, obviously, and so that it behooves us to try to remain as embedded as possible with the customers along the way.
So let's talk a little bit about the length of a project and how significant the impact can be. I mean, so is it you start with somebody, is it a 6-month project, 3 month, you're with them for a lifetime, you're selling them a service?
So the answer to that would be yes.
Yes.
So we spoke earlier about the need to build the relationship. And so one of the big challenges in what we do is identifying how you go about doing that without being able to take the home run swing the first time. They have to know that you can execute on a smaller level. So we are able to tackle, we're big enough to tackle the big projects, but still small enough to tackle the little things that help you work your way through and allow team leads and client leads to get to know each other. And then we also offer a service group that's about 15% of our overall business that allows us to have people regularly engaged. And what I mean by regularly is contractually we'll have somebody in somebody's facility for, be it 40 hours a month, 100 hours a month, something to this effect, or a mix of our people. So if they don't have these particular resources on their own staff, it allows us to serve that purpose for them, much like somebody would hire an outside IT firm or an outside accounting firm. We serve that same role. We come in once a month, verify the health of this, do a little bit of training with that, repair the honey-do list, make sure all of the transactions are in order, and everything I just said could have easily been applied to an accountant as well as it is with us. So those smaller engagements mix in well with the larger projects. So some things our people get involved with are a day here and there, and up to, when we get in multi-million-dollar projects, you're typically a 6 to 9 month window in the execution of something like that. So and everything in between.
Yeah, it's definitely a customer intensive business where you're working directly with them. Could you just tell us a bit about how did you end up at process and data automation? I think the other thing I'd like to talk about is you're a true entrepreneur, very successful, but tell us how did you become an entrepreneur? How did you end up at owning this company?
So honestly, as I left Penn State Behrend here in 1997, I went to work for another local entrepreneur who was doing very, very similar work, but it was a much smaller company, as in I was person number 3. And I interviewed for the project or for the meeting, and they were working on projects all over the country, a handful of people working all over the country. The real difference between that company and ours over time has been that the vast majority was made from of the business there was made from one person's connections, and I went and did that through 2002, and then following 9/11, it was a big change in capital spending. In the time from 1997 to 2002, I almost spent no time in engineering, about a year's worth, and then I had moved into a sales and administrative role. I was in charge of business development, so there I had already started to learn how to operate the business and how to make the money side of it work. Mm-hmm. We took the group from the 3 people. I was number 3 at that point. We had grown the business to 12 people, and it was very regular and repeatable, and so that was good. The problem was we were in a vertical that was being commoditized, and they were being squeezed out of it. And I think very astutely, the owner of that business saw that when the capital drop after 9/11 happened, it was going to have a real negative impact. So we had a decision on our hands, myself and the engineering management from there, as to whether we were going to purchase that business or whether we were just going to go do our own thing. And we really realized, with the commoditization going on there and the fact that almost 100% of that business happened greater than 5 hours away from Erie, we're going to be on the road all the time. Mm-hmm. And so we decided to go ahead and start it just from scratch. And we had a couple of local contacts and some people we knew. And so we started with the knuckles, going to the doors, and started out with 3 of us working out of our homes. One was in Corey, one was in downtown, wow. The other guy's somewhere in the middle. We were running around doing work for people all over the tri-state area. So.
And today, how large is process and data automation? You started out with the 3 of you out in the street?
Last month, we had, we say 42 and a half, because I have a part-time employee that's at a high-level engineering that works elsewhere in town. So 42 and a half people working for us. So starting with 3 and over, I think it's been about 17 years now, or coming up on 18, it's grown to 42 and a half. That's pretty good size integration company for Erie. Yeah,
no, that's a really nice size. And it's still, I mean, you're not too large, so you know everybody, you mm-hmm. can manage it. The other thing that you made me think about was starting that other small company, even though it didn't last. There's such a great advantage of what you learn in a small company.
Absolutely, no question. No question whatsoever. And I don't look back in any way negatively at the time that I spent. Definitely was a company owned by a husband and wife engineering team, and never really got out of that shell. And as we've gone on now and we've grown, we've joined peer groups. We know and work with other people that are in the same roles that we are, just with companies all over the country. We see that a lot. People can't get out of their own way and get past the first or second engineering engagement, and they're constantly worried about how to technically perfect things, and they don't meld that well with the business side.
Yeah.
So when we started the business, I had already been a few years removed from a lot of detailed engineering, although it didn't hurt that in a crunch, I could certainly jump over and help. Show me how to run modern AutoCAD or something like this, and I can pitch in and I get the concepts. But by and large, from day one, we had somebody running the control side, somebody running what is now today called the digitalization side. We called it for many years the data services group. And somebody was focused on the business from day one. Mm-hmm. So that's been a huge advantage to us, is we didn't have to make that leap. That all comes from that experience elsewhere.
Yeah, it's amazing when there are only a few people in the company. You learn pretty quickly about finances and revenue and HR. No one's immune, or everyone has to be involved, from taking out the trash to whatever else. So yeah, I always recommend to people, if you get an opportunity to be involved in a startup, you should do so. That leads to my next question. So you were, I won't say ahead of your time, people in the U.S. and around the world have been starting companies for a long mm-hmm. time, but there's a tremendous recognition of the importance of entrepreneurship now, particularly as we need to continue to grow the economy. So a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs in our community everywhere, it is in vogue in a good way. I mean, what's your advice for people who are looking to start? They're there with 3 people in their company, or 1 or 2.
It's an interesting question. I guess the first thing I would tell anybody is, as I quickly learned, whether or not you can become involved with a local small business association or something to that effect, somewhere before long, when you get going down the road, you're going to have to prove to people that you believe in your business enough to put your own assets into it.
Your own money's got to go in, right?
Exactly. And if it's not your money, it's got to be kind of your money in the form of vouching via assets and things of this nature for lines of credit. It's one thing to ask somebody to sell you $2,000 worth of software, but one of the first projects we had here locally, we had to buy almost 6 figures worth of hardware. And while we had long working relationships with the people who would sell these things to us, they said, you guys are great people. How are we going to make sure we get paid? No offense, you guys are great guys, but I mean, how do we make sure we get paid? And so we were dealing at the time with the SBA and a few other groups, and how are we going to do that? And they said, well, eventually you're going to have to go to the bank, and you're going to have to put up your houses as collateral, and they'll give you all the money you want if you're willing to sign your 401ks and so on and so forth. And so you need to make sure that there's a genuine need for what it is you're doing, and that you don't get in over your head. One thing I see, it's ironic you should mention this, because I had an entrepreneur visit me in early December, works locally, worked for us as an intern at one point, and was explaining what it's been like for the years he's been in business, and it hasn't gone nearly as well. Mm-hmm. And the reality of it is, he spent almost no time working in this field before he decided he could run a company that worked in this field. And I said, a lot of people will get charged up and convince you can do all kinds of great things. You better make sure you know how to do it. If you want to run a pizza joint, go work in one for a while. If you want to run 5 pizza joints, work in a management role where you have to operate multi-site, finances and things of this nature, purchasing and so on and so forth. You don't have to do it for 5 years, 10 years or whatever, but at least make sure you understand what's involved with it, because like clockwork, every 2 weeks or every 2 Fridays, payroll is due. Taxes are due every month. The accountant wants answers.
The other thing that seems, so hard to me is I see entrepreneurs, and, we have a lot who come through our Innovation Commons and others, is knowing whether there's really a market. Mm-hmm. People, I have found that they believe one's out there, but they don't really know. And if you can't sell something, you're dead.
Right. Absolutely. You can only live on seed money for so long. You can only convince rounds of funding for so long before you do have to start producing. Yeah.
So I want to switch gears a little bit. Let me again remind our viewers, I'm Dr. Ralph Ford, and this is Behrend Talks, and my guest today is Joe Snyder, the president of Process and Data Automation. So, Joe, we hear a lot about Industry 4.0. And we hear a lot about Internet of Things. And, it's one of those ones, if I heard that word so much right now or looked at all the news sources and had a penny for each one, I might have a lot of money. Right. But what does it really mean? Can you help us understand those things?
So that's an interesting way of putting it. It's had such an influence on our business. I mean, we operated for 15, 16 years with our engineering services group and our data services group. We actually changed the name of our data services group to the digitalization group, because no matter what, nobody understood what data services group meant. Mm-hmm. But at least some, through hearing it through all these other sources you're talking about, be it called Industry 4.0 or digitalization, knew what that meant. And so that helped us to change that moniker, if you will. So there's been a few things that have happened in manufacturing, or you want to say manufacturing, but also in electronics and communications over the last 10 to 15 years. A couple of those things, you've got sensors. The cost, or the quality of sensors has gone up, while the cost and how to power those sensors has gone down. And so what used to require wires going to something to power it, and it was great big, is now a lot smaller. It's battery powered. The data it gives you is as good or better, and it never has to be plugged into anything per se necessarily. So the advent of those types of sensors has certainly been a huge benefit. But the uptick in the availability and the performance quality of connected networks and machinery on the floor. So when I got into this business, I say the floor is in the factory floor. Mm-hmm. When I got into this business, the vast majority of machines were tied together over proprietary networks. And so depending on whose manufacturer had built the machines or the machine in a facility, you might need various proprietary cards, various proprietary connectors. It was a very expensive and cumbersome and difficult part of what we do. Industry has now kind of all bought on, and that everything is Ethernet. Now there's different flavors of communication across Ethernet, But when you bring that high-speed backbone, if you will, that's one type of network. Certainly there's nuances to putting it on the factory floor versus in an office environment. But to have one type of network through similar types of, whether that be Cisco or somebody else's switches or infrastructure, now you start to really be able to connect things together. So when you would ask somebody 10 or 15 years ago, would you like to know the temperature of this building in 60 places? And they would say, well, certainly that would be beneficial. It would allow us to balance the HVAC, make sure we're not spoiling product, make sure the humidity is optimized in our manufacturing area. And he said, well, that'll cost you $250,000. They say, we'll send somebody around to check that manually. Well, nowadays, a system to implement something like that using the connectivity that's already within a plant, wireless technologies, and these higher end sensors that can give you information a lot easier, it's come down an order of magnitude, and it can be implemented in a matter, a fraction, again, an order of magnitude less time. And so now people say, okay, now that's real actionable intelligence that I don't have to go through 7 layers of approvals to determine whether I should spend the money to do that. That's expense cash. And absolutely, I can find out if there's a problem in the warehouse or any of the manufacturing areas or something like that.
Yeah, the technology is mature. The whole technology curve is at that point where it's so different. You don't have to have a room full of PhDs to create the system or whatever else it may be. Something very important happened 3 years ago, which was you were purchased by the Crones Group, which is a large multinational corporation. Can you tell us what that is about and what that means?
Absolutely. Yes, Crones Group, our parent company in Franklin, Wisconsin, and their parent company in New Traubling, Germany, has 15,000 plus employees worldwide, and they're the worldwide leader in the production of equipment that deals in liquid food. So what does that mean? Whether that be the manufacturing end, the batching systems that would go into making your soft drinks, your beers, your spirits, or anything liquid food, something that would come out of a squeezable container, or more so the packaging lines as well. So the integrated packaging lines from the formation of a container all the way through the palletized and out the door, and now these days into fully integrated warehouse management systems and so on that they needed a presence in North America in what they considered to be the industrial IT space because of all the reasons we've talked about. Customers want the connectivity, customers want the information, the lines have to run more hours with less downtime and less people operating the equipment and so on. And they recognize that could not be delivered in every region of the globe by people sitting in Central Europe. And so as they grew their group in China and in other regions of the world, they found that from a growth standpoint, that would be very difficult to do organically from Franklin, which is in the outskirts of Milwaukee, and so they decided to do that via acquisition and bought Process and Data Automation.
So did they find you? Did you have a pre-existing relationship?
Honestly, we'd worked with odds and ends pieces of equipment through the years, not even necessarily new ones, so we knew who they were. Process and Data Automation was not at the time for sale, and they found us. And at some point, somebody's explained the whole process to me, and that would be a whole 30-minute conversation of its own, but I understand better how they did that. And it was, as I told them when I initially responded to their request, it's very flattering that somehow they came about finding us, and it's been a good fit for us.
Well, I mean, that's what the thing that I find so impressive. I've known you and your company for a long time. You have a very unique set of skills and people and capability. So I find that just a really great part of the story. They found you here in Erie, Pennsylvania, and it sounds like they're just letting you continue to develop the customer base, but of course they bring a larger presence as well. So.
Certainly.
Yeah. And now one of the other things that we haven't got to yet is you relocated your company.
Yes,
I don't know. How many years ago now? Was that 5 years ago?
Coming up on 5 right now.
And you moved on, into Knowledge Park, right close to campus here, connected to our campus, which is part of our whole open laboratory philosophy. So can you tell us a little bit about, why did you move to Knowledge Park? I remember you were in the news, you were looking at all these other spaces. I don't want to bring that back up, but you were trying to find a home for a while.
So we had been in 2 prior facilities, and my partner and I owned those. And it was great. I mean, they served us well, and certainly at least one of them, when we sold it, served us very well. But what we recognized that one of the keys to the success of the business had been the connectivity to the university. We get to know many of the students, and even though we weren't terribly far away, we don't think about that in the middle of summer when we're hiring an intern to say, hey, you're going to take 15 minutes to come over to PDA, work for 3 hours in this gap between classes. But in the middle of January, it's that 3-hour gap can turn into who knows what because of the weather and so on. So we liked the idea of expanding both our interns and the number of and the quality of the senior design projects that we're doing, because all of those serve us. The things that we do through the senior design projects turn into our training tools and our playground, if you will, that we have up in the open lab on Merwin Lane. And so it also gives us a chance to, now we're looking at a very in-depth level, many more students, as opposed to the 1 or 2 interns we have at any given point in time. I think there's 5 there currently, and we're sponsoring, there's only 1 senior design project this year. So we're only looking in depth at 3 or 4 more students this year. That's a lot of students to get a good relationship with,
Sure.
as opposed to sitting from an HR perspective and interviewing everybody just stone cold, just like everybody else at a career fair. So that's we've expanded on that quite a bit since we've been up here.
So when the students walk in and they don't have experience, what is it that, what's the advice you give a new student? What are the things they have to be aware of as they walk into process and data automation?
Well, we've spent a lot of years honing the system that we have, and it started out as the Wild West. There would be an intern there when they were available, and different people would come in and jockey for whose things were more important. We had to put a champion in charge of the program and put some confines around the type of thing that they'll do. But we actually have students come in and do meaningful work that's actually billable work, so they have learned enough that we can sell that as a professional service work within weeks of their arrival.
Wow.
And then over the span of time they're there, that slowly grows. The scope of that can grow. And so they learn more and more, and we've got something of increasing value to sell to customers.
Well, I'll tell you, that's the thing, too, is that if people think internships anymore are about going to get coffee and just dabbling a little bit, it's just not that way anymore. And it seems like technology and companies have enabled this, where you see stuff, they're expected to produce just like everybody else.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No question. And with the flexibility we have being here, we have one who just moved to Pittsburgh within the last couple of weeks, worked with us for a year even coming out of school. Gentleman didn't own a car until after he was a graduate from college. He rode on the little e-bus around here, and he lived on campus, went to school, would e-bus up to process a data, work for a few hours, reverse and repeat, go to a couple more classes and come back and work a few more hours and then go home for the evening or whatever. And in the end, he would work 15 to 18 hours per week for us. And he walked out of school significantly more valuable than he would be without any experience whatsoever.
Yeah. It's a great story.
Yes.
Well, let me ask one more question. How many of you've got 42 and a half employees.
Right.
How many of those are Penn State grads?
I would definitely say, without even batting any hesitation whatsoever, it's over half. And I would have to venture to guess that it's definitely more than 2/3, but I'll count them up and I'll send you an email.
Well, we definitely appreciate you being such a good sponsor of hiring our graduates and keeping that talent here in Erie. So we're coming to the close of our time. This has been a great conversation. Do you have anything else you want to add, Joe?
On your last statement, we wouldn't hire the students if they weren't worth hiring. So thank you for continuing to produce them for us. But we were faced with a difficult decision a few years ago when Crones approached us, and really, as we sat back and looked at it, Mike and myself and some of the senior management, we thought about how are the ways that we can continue to provide these types of jobs in the Erie area. And Franklin, Wisconsin, Milwaukee, they're facing the same thing that a lot of Rust Belt cities like Erie, brain drain, and people get trained and go there, or they work from there in Chicago, or everybody there deals with losing the talent to Harley Davidson or some of the other big names that are in the area that there's nothing wrong with, but they needed a different talent pool. They don't want PDA in Wisconsin because those people would probably just splinter and go to all these, so this allowed them to open a totally different front, if you will. And so we should be able to bring an entire new generation through and do increasingly interesting and complex things using the students and the staff that we have here, based right out of Erie, doing phenomenal things all over North America.
Well, we appreciate your commitment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Business Spotlight on Money Radio WPSE. Join us again on Saturday morning at 9:30 a.m. for an encore presentation of the Business Spotlight with Dr. Ralph Ford, Chancellor at Penn State Behrend.